program manager for the city of Greeley. And in that capacity, she oversees the long-term water supply planning, regional water resource project engagement, and watershed health initiatives. Notably, she leads Greeley's watershed team, which supports restoration efforts following the 2020 Cameron Peak fire and watershed resilience. She's a member of the Fort Collins Natural Resources Advisory Board and serves as the vice chair of the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed. And she's a proud graduate of WECO's Water Leaders Program. Let's welcome Helen. And she's going to talk about the Terry Ranch project, which is very fascinating. We're always excited to hear about this. So,
and I'm going to think of pretty quickly. Raise your hand. Sometimes get in water window and it's a little bit confusing. So I just want to talk today about the Terry Ranch project. Lady. The other like from the north side.
They were going to fight me.
Here, I think I just leave it right there. Okay, so just a quick outline. We'll be going over kind of how Greeley plans and the system overview for the city of Greeley. We'll talk specifically about the Terry Ranch project. We'll talk about how we're going to plan for the Terry Ranch project. We'll talk about adaptive. So really, how are we going from 50 years from now to today and making changes along the way as we see the future change. It really has a, whoop, it's okay. I think I figured that. Okay. Really has a really rich history of planning for the future, which frankly makes my job really easy. But we have really, in the past, traditionally planned for a single future scenario in the future, meaning that we say, hey, what's been going on in the past? And we apply that to the future. We assume we're going to see the same growth rates, we're going to see the same climate, we're going to see the same ways of using the land that we've been doing in the past. And as you guys know, we're really not seeing that now. So what we decided to do in 2023, it was years long to get to 2023, but we implemented integrated water resource plan. And we'll talk more about what that plan did and how we're changing, the way we're going into the future from there. To give a system overview, Greeley has an incredibly diverse and robust system. We get water from 4 different river basins. The Colorado River Basin through the Winnie Gap and Colorado Big Thompson projects. We get water from the Laramie Basin through a tunnel that goes into the Cashel-Poudre River. We get water from the Big Thompson Basin, and then really our bread and butter is up in the Poudre Basin. We have 2 different treatment facilities. One's in Bellevue, as you see up top, and then one at Boyd Lake in Loveland. Both those provide water to our community. Really, Bellevue is how we get water year round. We turn on the Boyd plant just when we're getting those large demands in the summer. I want to point out, though, while this is an incredibly diverse system, we still experience real risk. For example, in the 2020 fire season, we saw every single one of our watersheds burn, so Cameron becomes troublesome. So that's some of the things that we're doing now with our watershed program to protect the impacts of those. We still get days that we call off river where we're not able to treat water because the water quality is so bad that we have to close off our intake and let the water go by. So we're missing out on some of our water rights there. Right now it's okay because we're still pretty flush with water, and we actually have good community engagement with the ag community, and so we can do some trades there where they'll take some of their water for us. But if you can imagine, if our system is really stressed, as some other communities are, and we have those instances, it would be a really big deal. So really focused on figuring out how can we be as redundant as possible. You see, we have 2 treatment plants. If we can't take from Bellevue, we can treat on Boyd. We can really right now act as a diverse and robust system, but in the advent of our demands growing, we need to make sure that that is even more protected. Okay, next slide. So the real talk today is about the Terry Ranch aquifer, and we're going to get into why we chose Terry Ranch as a long-term storage solution for our community. I want to point out Milton Seaman again. Milton Seaman Reservoir is on the north fork of the Cashel-Poudre. right before you hit the main stem. If you're familiar with Gateway Natural Area in Fort Collins, it's right behind there. That is Greeley's big, most operating reservoir right now for years. And I mean, 50 to 30 years, we have been planning on expanding that reservoir, but it is an on-stream reservoir. There's the pebble jumping mouse, which is an endangered species. So there's a lot of issues expanding that reservoir. In order to go through the permitting process of that, we had to go through a process called an alternative evaluation to really prove that our community needed only Mountain Steam Reservoir and there were no other alternatives that we could use. During that alternative screening process, we found Terry Ranch. What is Terry Ranch? Terry Ranch is an aquifer, a non-tributary aquifer. That basically means it's closed. There's not enough inputs and outputs to it to say that it's really fluxing and yield of the water in the aquifer. It's just south of the Wyoming border, and it is an operating bison ranch. So it is actually Terry Ranch Bison Ranch. We just call it Terry Ranch. But it's decreed with 1.2 million acre feet of water. That's a lot of water. Right now, the city of Greeley uses about 25,000 acre feet of water annually. So you can imagine how much water is in Terry Ranch. The long-term idea of Terry Ranch is that it will be used as an ASR project, or an aquifer storage and recovery project. What that means is that when we need it, it's primarily right now thought of as a drought source. So when we'll first bring it on, we'll be bringing it out just during periods of drought, and we'll extract that water from the aquifer. So that 1.2 million acre feet. That 1.2 million acre feet is importantly a single-use source. Which means once we use it, it is out of the aquifer. We can never have it again, which is scary from a planning standpoint, but it's a big buffer for our community. Then the next step will be when available, when we have water available, we have these big water years, we're going to be able to treat that water at the Bellevue plant and send it up to Terry Ranch and pump it inside Terry Ranch. There are some pros and some cons of this. One of the biggest pros is like, there's hardly any environmental issue here. So we are like feeling good about that. We've done everything that we need. There's no endangered species. We're not adding to this kind of contentious, like expanding reservoirs, building reservoirs, all of that. We are putting water underground. That means there's also no evaporation. So once it's under there, we're not losing it. The con here is that it's pretty expensive. It's expensive because we have to treat it at our plant and then send it up. And there's a lot of energy that's needed to pump that water up north. We can bring it back down via gravity, but we'll have to pump it up originally. And then we have to treat it again when we pull it out. So it's a two treatment process. So that there are some cons to this, but we saw the pros as being like wildly outweighing. Next, please. I'm going to kind of blow through this because we're short on time, but we did do an incredible due diligence before we purchased this aquifer. So we did do an aquifer inspection, which is really like a geological evaluation of what the environment, what the aquifer is, what the environment, the hydro and geochemistry of it. And we conducted an incredibly thorough water quality inspection. And we actually went up there and brought a pretend treatment facility and made sure that we could treat this water to the best quality that we could, that we would meet all of the standards we need to and meet all the standards that Greeley feels that it needs to meet. We did find that there's natural uranium present. However, the uranium can be pretty easily removed. And from a treatment standpoint, it's actually pretty cost effective because the water is almost the exact same quality every time we pull it out. Unlike things like at Bellevue, where we might see, if we're pulling from the North Fork, for example, we might see I2C, high like algae levels, those types of things that we're trying to pump out. This is basically the same every time, so it's going to be a lot more predictable to treat. Next. The uranium removal will be an ion exchange, which is common and proven, and will be removed below detection levels. And we did conduct that pilot test that I talked about, where we literally went on site, brought a little science car up there to make sure that we can treat to drinkability. Okay, so now that we've,
Curious, you remove the uranium. Uranium, what do you do with it then?
so we have to pay to then dispose of it. So there are companies that we essentially would pay to come get it, and they would take it kind of like any kind of waste that we do deal with similar things that are other facilities. Okay, so now that we've identified our long-term storage opportunity for the city of Greeley, how are we planning on using it? We're really going to get into what we'll call the IWRP, that's the Integrated Water Resource Plan. And this is what I'm talking about when I said we used to plan for one single future. So we used to expect all of the things that we saw in the past to happen and be in the future. But as the potential for Greeley's water supply system just becomes super fuzzy as we're looking at these long time horizons, particularly now that we're seeing incredible growth in the region. We're seeing land use change in ways that I don't think anybody predicted. And we're seeing an incredible efficiency of indoor bills. So things like toilet flushes are going down to basically as low as they can be. Let's see, sorry, my notes. Yeah, we're seeing efficiency, and we're seeing just changes in ways people are using water. And one of those things is really because the cost of water is getting so high. So people are abandoning landscapes, or they're going to terracing, or builders are building in a way that's different so that people can more easily afford houses. So the IWRP was intended to capture all of those different future conditions and provide a way to plan to say, hey, what might these different futures look like, and how can we best meet today for the suite of future conditions? One of those things was climate change. So this was definitely something we wanted to integrate into the IWRP. As the climate changes, we can see like a huge variety of impacts on our water system, especially just our water resources. So as the climates warm, will probably reduce yields. We might actually see hydrograph shifts, so we might see a later runoff, earlier change of how ag needs to use the water. Right now, the system that we work within, the Colorado water law system, is really based on past use. So we might see things that we're not expecting to, and we might have to watch out for the way that the state is running, the ways that we're using our like very strictly controlled decrees. So that's a risk. Reservoir evaporation will likely increase. We might see things like fire more often on the landscape, and fire really affects runoff because there's no tree coverage, and there might be ash on the snow that makes the snow melt faster. And then we might need more outdoor water demands to keep things like grass on the landscape. So there's a whole suite of things that we wanted to capture in the IWRP. Next. What we did was we basically asked everybody in our department, we said, what are you worried about in the future? And we took all of the risks that they said, we piled them into what we call these drivers. So we have 4 main drivers for the future conditions, or for each planning scenario. We have climate warming, which you can see is just on a scale of 1 to 3 here. It says like, hey, we have a no climate change scenario because we want to know like how do these future conditions really change from what we have been planning for? We have Colorado River Basin impacts here because we're worried about what might happen. One, if we're seeing less come out of the Colorado River Basin, but because there's some open conversations right now between the states on how we're using Colorado River water, and we want to be sure that we're prepared if they ask us to take less. We have Water Rights Administration. That's what I was talking about. If we see changes in the state, at a state level, even a local northern Colorado level, if we get a different river commissioner, that's the person that tells us how we're using water on the river and if it's okay to pull. If we just get a different person, we might be working in a totally different way than we have in the past. We also have demand growth, and demand growth is this huge thing that I'll talk about in 1 second, but we wanted to really make sure that we're not estimating how much demand is going to happen, because as we've seen in the past, we've actually been overestimating demand. So we created these planning scenarios because we wanted it to be easily consumable, not only to our community, but to our leadership. So they could say, like, hey, I'm not a demand modeler or a water rights professional, but I understand, like, hey, that's less water, and this is more water. And so we have these planning scenarios that we spend a lot of time naming. I'm not sure that it really matters, but unbearable basically says we grow so much and the weather gets so bad and we get so little water. Like, are we able to withstand that? And the answer is yes, if. So we'll go on to talking about demand. One of the is we've been planning as a community and many communities plan in this way where we just expect we get to the day that we submit the plan and we put demand growth right on top of that day. Well, it turns out we're not seeing demand growth yet. So this could happen in 2080, or it could happen in 20 or 2210. Like, I don't know what we're talking about. Because we're not seeing demand growth, and that's because of those things like efficient fixtures, land abandonment, xeriscaping, and all of these other things. So we're seeing a lot of people come to our community, not seeing our water demand grow. And that's kind of scary. We also have communities like Colorado Springs, for example, that saw demand growth, and then they had a really bad drought year, and they have never seen demands as high as they did right before that. So we are really trying to be conservative on how we're estimating when demand growth is going to happen, because it's very, very impactful to our ratepayers if we expect it in 2080, and it's really not coming to, for another 100, 200 years. So we want to make sure that we're really balancing the fiscal impact of these things. What that brings us to is adaptive planning. And so Terra Ranch, because it's this huge project and we need it eventually in every single scenario, all those 5 scenarios says we need Terra Ranch. We want to be able to know when we need to trigger bringing it on. And that's things like matching that demand, saying, hey, at this moment, we saw a few more people come to Greeley, and we actually saw our demand numbers change during that. So the factors that might change when we're triggering Terra Ranch is if we don't see demand growth change. If we're seeing demand growth stay the same for the next 15 years, we're going to cool our jets on Terra Ranch and not burden our current ratepayer with that. But if we see the opposite, we might need to bring it on faster. If we see incredible drought year after year after year after year, we might say, hey, this is giving us a little bit of caution and says we need to start bringing Terra Ranch online. And the reason we're trying to watch that so closely is because there's a lot that goes into bringing Terra Ranch online. So what will implementation look like? Right now, we're installing high priority pipelines. We're already doing that because, as everyone in this room knows, there's incredible growth in northern Colorado. So we want to get that pipe in the ground before anybody moves there, and while we can do it, while it's cost effective. Then we'll move to constructing a treatment facility and the remaining pipeline. As I told you before, we've got to treat it when the water goes in, got to treat it when the water comes out. It's a treated pipeline that goes up there. And then we'll install wells. We do have wells up there right now. We'll continue to install them. They do have a lot of upkeep. So the wells that we have right now, we're not using them. So when we bring them online, we'll have to do it again. We'll have to re-drill those wells. And we also want to be really careful about how we're moving forward with well development, because we don't want to spend the money if we don't need those types of wells. So about 1 CFS out, which is not that much per well, and then about 0.75 CFS in per well. Then we will eventually get to injection. Like I said, we'll bring out before we put in, and we'll additionally install wells. So what are we doing right now? As I said before, we're still putting in high priority pipeline. That will eventually stop that once we get out of a high growth area and we say, hey, we want to make sure that we're being responsible with our dollars. But we're also continuing to acquire water rights, and then we're reevaluating the IWRP all the time, and that includes that adaptive plan. So this is just pretty pictures of us actually getting the high priority pipeline in the ground. This is a T-junction with our Bellevue 60-inch potable line. So if you can imagine, here's Greeley. It tees in from Bellevue near the Poudre River, Mount Poudre. So again, we're utilizing the IWRP to help build our long-term water supply system while leveraging Terry Ranch, knowing that that's a thing we can pull on eventually, but trying to really balance, like, when do we really need it? How can we be responsible to our ratepayers and our community? And also ensure that we're still getting some water rights, because one of the things that the IWRP told us is that we do still need a little bit more water. And we've been trying for a long time to figure out how to also maintain, because our community is an agricultural community. And so we're currently working on what's called a Bureau interruptible supply plan in one of our water court change cases. What that means is that we're basically taking the water that we already have from ag, but we're saying, hey, we want to give it back to you and let you use it unless we really need it. So we do every year, we say, hey, what's our water supply? We do like kind of a gut check of whether we're going to probably have a hard year or we're going to come into the year pretty flush with water. One of those things is climate. One of them is the CBT quota. One of those things is like, where did we leave last year? And then we also have snowpack information. And now we're trying to integrate those with aerial snow observation studies to figure out how we can be better at estimating what kind of water you'll have. So we're really working with ag to say, hey, keep it on your land unless you really need it, and then we'll let you know. We'll only take it 3 years out of 10. That has never successfully been done, so we're really trying to figure out how to do it, but TBD. Okay, I've mentioned adaptive planning over and over and over, but what does that really mean? That means every year we're coming to board and we're presenting on what we're seeing and the future looks like it's changing. Those things mean that we're monitoring demand growth and water supply conditions. That means we have a bunch of metrics that we say, hey, this matters. Are we seeing patterns here? Are we seeing something scary happen? Are we seeing more risks with our water, both on our water supply conditions? Like I said, from a fire standpoint, are we off river all the time? And maybe we need to go to something more robust, or our demand starting to grow. That means, that means we're also evaluating the Terry Ranch triggers. Like I said before, once we see demand growth or water supply conditions really changing, we might say, hey, Terry Ranch might need to be brought online a little bit earlier. So maybe we start seeing more of that pipeline installation over the next 10 years in our CIP. We'll also update the Terry Ranch implementation plan based off those triggers. And we'll assess our water rights and our changes and our acquisitions. Greeley is really lucky because we've been around for a long time. A lot of our old change cases means that water that used to be in an agricultural use is being changed to municipal use. A lot of our change cases, like, were pretty good. We got really good yield numbers from those change cases. We're seeing that change because we're seeing some tighter administration of those rights. So we want to make sure that we're predicting yields appropriately based off our unchanged water rights in our modeling for future conditions. That was a lot. I hope it was able to understand. And then we'll also just kind of keep an eye out for other water supply opportunities and regional projects, things like NISP, the Halligan expansion. We want to make sure that we're aware of what's going on because those might impact our water rights, but there also might be some kind of regional opportunity that we want to be a part of because we do believe that the region needs to start collaborating in some level to protect not only our region, but our water resources. That's it. I don't know if it's 10 minutes, but I tried.
Yay.
Mentioned buying Terry Ranch Aquifer. Yeah. Did you buy the property or can you? No. Yeah, so we bought the water in the aquifer and we had to, it's been an interesting project management component because it's still an active bison ranch. So it's actually checkerboarded with state land board land and Terry Bison Ranch land, and Terry Bison Ranch leases the state land board land for the bison to be on there. They're really concerned about us protecting their investment and their livestock, obviously. So we don't leave gates open, and we have to work really closely with the owners of the land. So we have very complicated lease structures and that type of thing to be able to access the property. We're also working with state land boards. The water we purchased, was it like under one heading? There are a lot of different. It's that checkerboarded, it's strange, but it is under the checkerboarded, like technically only under Cherry Ranch, not even under the state land board. Yes.
So you mentioned drilling more wells on the ranch. Do you plan on using any of the existing ones, or is that going to be just for the bison?
We definitely plan on using the existing wells. Like right now, we're using them to continue basically due diligence on the property. But when we need to eventually, they're not to spec for, and I'm not a engineer, a groundwater engineer. They're not to spec for production right now. So when we get back on property, we would have to upgrade them to production wells.
I know you just said that you're not an engineer, but I have two questions. And if you don't know the answer, that's fine too. If this is the aquifer and it's got 1.2 million acre feet, and will you guys be metering at the wells to know how much you've taken out? Like, are we assuming that 1.2 is the capacity total?
It is
or
not.
It is not.
It is not
Okay.
the total capacity. Yes, we will be metering.
Okay.
So we absolutely have, we still have to keep track of our water, like to the nth degree based off of the state. But it is not the capacity. So theoretically, we could put, I can't remember what the capacity is. I believe it's like 1.45 million acre feet. So theoretically, we could inject before we withdraw. However, that's just unlikely that we would do that given the cost of the actual like injection components
Mhm.
and the idea that we'll probably as a community need it as a drought source before we'll have like a bunch of excess water in there. But we're currently trying to figure out really how we're going to use it from like once it comes online, because we have these ideas, but we've never really been stressed. We haven't modeled exactly what, what would trigger us pulling before we might want to inject, because there is a future in which we get 100 years from now and we haven't seen demands increase and we say, hey, we have all this water, why don't we start putting some up? So that could exist in the future. However, that's not how we're planning to use it right now.
And then just to follow up on that, when you say you treat going in and coming out, are you guys treating the same way in and out, or is there a different treatment procedure to put it in? This is maybe kind of a science thing, but
It's
like,
essentially regulation. So we're treating basically the non-detect on everything on both ends, but we're treating very good because it will be like Cougar River water, for example, coming and then aquifer water coming out. And then most likely, because we'll be injecting at a certain rate, it will kind of mix and diffuse. And so it might change a little bit as we're pulling out, but it will be more like the aquifer water every time.
What's the cost of Terry Ranch versus what you were planning to spend on the
That's a
Seaman
great
expansion?
question. It is so much more affordable for our community. And one of the reasons, and I'm not the expert on this because I did not negotiate this, but one of the reasons is because one of the reasons we went to Terry Ranch was we were able to create this like incredibly complex purchase structure where Wingfoot is the people that actually came in. A really important part of this is that there was a group that came in and got our offer decree. So they did all of the decree issues there, which means that we didn't have a risk coming in. We knew it was decreed for as a non-tributary aquifer at 1.2 million acre feet. We knew what we could do with it, what we couldn't do with it. So there was no risk to the community, which is just something we couldn't afford to do unless Wingfoot had done that. The second thing is that we were able to negotiate a purchase structure with Wingfoot that allowed us to put very little money up front. So we actually were able to give credits to Wingfoot to sell to developers in the Greeley community instead of giving them a bunch of upfront money. So what we did is instead of cash in lieu or dedication of water, which is how normally developers come in and ask us for water so that they can develop, they can actually buy slightly cheaper credits from Wingfoot. And then Wingfoot at the end of the year can say, hey, we sold no credits, you owe us, like there is a put and call structure on those credits. But we didn't have to put up that much money. So right now, we have budgeted every year. So in case they put in, we need to call, we can pay them out for that year of credits. But it was very little risk to the community. And they came with a certain amount of money to help us begin that initial pipeline installation. So ultimately, it allowed us to spread that out on our ratepayers instead of having that huge upfront cost of creating an expanded policy. Not to mention the years and years and years and years that it still might be taking, as you see Fort Collins attempt to expand Halligan Reservoir, just to get a permit and not even talking about building the actual structure. That's great.
When you talk about like extraction and putting it in, is there a point at which like a level for the aquifer that extraction gets cut off, or is the city plans to like deplete it if necessary?
So again, I'm not a groundwater engineer, but essentially you have these like points of, oh man, I forget what they're called, but they make essentially these like holes in the aquifer, and then it becomes not cost effective to use those anymore. But from a leadership perspective, our board has told us, hey, we don't want to use more. Well, hold on, let me start back. From a water rights perspective, we can only use like 1% of the aquifer per year. That banks though, so we've owned the aquifer for a number of years and we're not taking it out. So we're not necessarily constrained by that in the future, imagining that we don't use it for another 40 years. However, our board and our leadership has said we're not comfortable using more than X amount over a certain period of time. And so in the hierarchy, we modeled a certain drawdown percentage that our board said we're not comfortable with. And frankly, that is way higher than any other community that we're seeing that actually. So we're going in from like an incredibly conservative standpoint of a drawdown.
So the pipelines you're building is just from Bellevue up to Terry Ranch and the water will go back and forth and then
No.
same pipeline?
It's from our city to Terry Ranch, but our pipeline intersects it. So we'll be able to essentially use that same pipeline to tee into. So we get to just turn it on and turn it off to say when we want to pull water from or to Terry Ranch. Does that make sense?
Are other communities trying to get in there?
Yeah. I really stand on that. Concerned about it, and now we're doing it. We have people approaching us. And we actually have a lot of other people interested in doing change cases in that same aquifer region. So we're seeing some change cases going through right now of adjacent properties.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the demand growth modeling aspect. And I know like it's complex and you have to integrate like who's moving into the region, population, just internal population growth, and then, you know, how much water people are using and kind of trends in all the different water efficiency and conservation practices. But like, what are you using to model that? And like, how is that common across municipalities, if at all? Or like, do you talk about that with other municipalities? Do you talk about it with like, what is the conversation about that?
No, that's a great point. You know, I think that there have been a few consultant agencies that have looked, because generally, you know, we outsource that type of thing. So I work in hand with a consultant agency to figure out our demand model and say like, hey, like one of the things that we did was we changed the way that we expected the city to grow. You know, we're again more of an agricultural community, so we have these large lots and we're expecting a certain kind of growth for years and years. And now we're saying, hey, we're actually seeing like multifamily living. We're seeing less irrigated outdoor use. We're seeing more like community lots that could be used from a non-potable non-potable watering use. And so we kind of just work and tweak all the levers that we have in there to say, hey, this is more like one future. And this is, you know, we had those 5 different scenarios where we had small growth, and we basically just toggle those to say, hey, this is how we do. But we do work with neighboring communities because one of the things that we do that I didn't even touch on at all is that we model like a ton of different hydrology based off of Fort Collins. A few years ago, they did an incredible modeling of how they might be impacted by climate change. And we just used that. We just called back and said, hey, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to leverage the work that you did handling. And then we were able to use that in our modeling.
Just to add to that, say Greeley and Fort Collins work like hand in hand on so many of these issues, especially in the upper Booter. And so Brad Wynn was talking about like collaboration. I think that's really important thing to keep in mind that a lot of people don't realize like how closely City of Greeley and City of Fort Collins water resources folks work together, and it's pretty cool to see that.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize like why Greeley's in the room sometimes, which is interesting for me because I'm always in the rooms for that. They don't understand that our system is in the Bureau of Watershed, and we have more assets than the city of Greeley, or city of in there, and so we're really protective of that area. And yeah, I'm glad to be in the room, and we're trying to be the best partners that we can be to Northern and to Fort Collins and really any other community. Yeah.
You, I think I caught this, you had said it was only the single use.
The water that
Yeah.
comes in aquifer.
Is
It's wholly consumptive, but you can use it only once. So you can use it to
right.
extinction, but it is gone as soon as it comes, right? There's no, because it's a non-tributary aquifer, it's not.
Right. I guess that's
Yeah,
what
sorry.
confused me, because, you know, you can use it till it's extinct, so
Yes,
it could
sorry.
potentially be, you know, bring water or whatever else.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, I apologize.
no, that's fair, because wasn't my understanding of non-tributary.
Sorry.
Any other questions? And then I think we need to move on to. Okay, well, thank you, Kelly.
Being a PIO, one of the most important things is being flexible.
I was like running after.
Power on my computer leaked out, so we got a substitute there. Brad came and did a full presentation when I was only expecting for a little bit. And now Carl Brower has texted me and says that he is being detained. He's not under arrest. He is unfortunately in a meeting that he cannot escape. So I am going to be presenting on the Northern Integrated Supply Project. And certainly this is a project that most people know about, but may not know kind of the ins and outs and kind of where it came from. And so I'm really going to be talking about where we are now, certainly where we've been, and where we're moving forward. Because for those of you who weren't at the symposium, things are being built as part of the Northern Integrated Supply Project right now and have been dedicated as part of the project, and we're excited to tell that story. So to start off with, this is a question that really drives the federal permitting process, but it also drives the way that we communicate with our communities. And that is, why do we need this project? And this is really from the environmental impact statement that was produced as part of this project. And well, I think I'm going to close that door because they're doing lunch setup. Is why I closed it.
Got
it. And so, yeah, it's to provide the project participants with approximately 40,000 acre feet of new reliable municipal water supply annually. And so that's a large amount of water to be able to be produced year in, year out through a regional project coordinated by the district, which will meet a portion of the participants' current and reasonably projected future additional water supply needs. So this really isn't to meet absolutely every need, but it is to get us to a point in the future where more of these communities have their needs being met. And I would put this in contrast with what you're going to see this afternoon. That Chimney Hollow is really the culmination of the Windy Gap project, that those communities in the mid-60s came together and realized that they needed to have additional water supplies. If you look at the list of participating communities here,
in the mid-60s, they weren't anything. That I grew up in Greeley, and Brad and I joke, you heard about it a little bit this morning, that, Rush was the beet diggers. Greeley, we were the spud diggers, come on. And so growing up in Greeley and going to school at CSU, I often got to make that trip from in-town Greeley up to Fort Collins, and I would pass through Severance. And there were 3 buildings in Severance. There was a gas station, a house, and of course, Bruce's bar. And I didn't, appreciate it at the time, just how much of a cultural treasure that is. But now you go through Severance, and there's a gas station, actually several gas stations. There's still Bruce's bar, but now there's 3,000 houses. And it's one of those communities that is emerging on the Colorado Front Range. So unlike the Windy Gap communities, the Greeleys, the Lovelands, the Longmonts of the world, which were already established, already had a big stake in CBT, these are communities that realized at really the turn of this century that that pipeline of people was not going to stop. That people like me are going to want to have their kids move out of their basement and move into a house, and they might want to live somewhere close by. And so these communities, I would call them the emerging communities of the Front Range. So we've got certainly the Severances of the world, the Windsors of the world, and really growing communities. Also kind of that South Weld corridor, Frederick, Firestone, Tacona. But the biggest participant of NIST is the Fort Collins Loveland Water District. So I'm sure that you all know that Fort Collins is served by 4 water districts. Fort Collins Utilities being the predominant one, but Fort Collins Loveland Water District is a huge portion, and that's where Fort Collins is growing toward. It's growing toward that southeast corridor. Think about the amenities out there. There's an airport there that's in the district, and the Humane Society, and all these other places that Fort Collins is growing into. And so it's interesting as we talk about what are the needs of northern Colorado, that Fort Collins is again, but again, that's serving a subset of the population of Fort Collins, whereas NIST is serving another subset. And so this is the purpose and need is really the projections that were made as part of the initial EIS process have borne out to be true, that there are more people coming, and they are still coming, and they're moving here. And when I go to CSU, I talk to classes and I say, it is students like you who come here for their education, love it, and they start their careers and sometimes start incredible business. I am lucky enough that when I went to CSU, there were a couple of businesses starting, New Belgium and Odell's, and I was still able to graduate. I was on the ground floor as I recognized that these are great, incredible new opportunities for my classmates. So let's talk about NIST compliance. Really, Brad made the joke about having engineers name projects. I don't know what we would have named this in the communications department, but it would have been this. Which doesn't roll off the tongue and get some spelling errors, and it's inappropriate. And what happens is the key word is integrated. That was a big thing when this project was being first put together, because this is more than just a reservoir northwest of Fort Collins. It is an integrated operation between a pair of reservoirs. So Glade Reservoir is certainly something that most people know about. It is up northwest of Fort Collins along US 287. And will be fed by Cache La Poudre water. The other part of that integrated project is Gailton Reservoir, which is out northeast of Alt, and that is going to be fed by a water right that Northern Water has actually on the South Platte River, right below the confluence with the Poudre. And so by being able to access that South Platte water, we can bring that into Gailton Reservoir. And the plan is for us to be able to integrate that water with Glade, but in kind of a different way. So, of course, Northern Water does have a water right on the Poudre to partially fill Glade Reservoir, but not fully. I mean, or it would take a long time to do so. By having this Gailton water right, we can talk to agricultural users north of Greeley and be able to say, look, you have, as Brad Wynn talked about it, those top shelf water rights in the Poudre River. Can we make an exchange with you and for your agricultural water, be able to substitute some of this water in Gailton Reservoir for water that you would normally divert out of the Poudre and allow us to divert that into Glade. And so it's an integrated operation. And for the farmers that choose to take part in this, certainly, yeah, there's a difference between South Platte water and Cashew Poudre, mouth of the canyon water. I will admit that. For those who say, well, that's South Platte water, you can't do anything with that. Brad gets his hackles up because that's the water that his farming operation has been using for generations. The water in the South Platte Valley that has come down past the confluence. But for those who are looking, and we'll talk about this in a future slide, for those who do see a difference in that water quality, and there are ways that we can compensate for that, whether it's additional water, whether it's cash, whether it, what is something that we can make this work. But at the heart of it, what it does is it offers an alternative to buy and dry. That if you're a farmer north of Greeley and someone comes knocking at your door and, it's not Thornton, but they offer you a big check to remove water from your lane, as opposed to Northern Water offering up saying, hey, we would like to keep this in irrigated agriculture. And so, but we also recognize the need for high quality drinking water. Is there a way that we could put together a project that will integrate those two purposes? So let's talk just a little bit about Glade Reservoir. And I mean, the key thing that you all know is, excuse me, there's a highway. And I realized coming from the north side, I proposed it to be the world's longest boat ring, but they said no. But so this reservoir would basically be created by putting a dam across what's now a dry valley. It's a valley that was created by uplift created by the Rocky Mountains that tilted up the sedimentary rocks. And so you have valleys like this all up and down the Front Range. Horsetooth Reservoir is in one of those valleys. Glade Reservoir, you'll see, is in one of those valleys, so is Carter Lake. And so the dam would be just north of Ted's Place. So Ted's Place would be, I would say unaffected. No, it's going to become a hub for everyone who wants to go boating at Glade Reservoir. But Ted's Place is still where you will turn to go up Big Thompson Canyon. And as you then go north, you would enter a county recreation area. We'll talk about that. And you would run into the dam. And so the dam is going to create a reservoir that is 170,000 acre feet. That puts a little bit bigger than Horsetooth. And it will be an earth-filled dam. And we'll talk about how that's different from Chimney Hollow when we go out there today. Because basically this is going to be a dam very similar to Horsetooth. That it's got clay in the middle. And this valley is full of clay. And when I was in elementary school, the art teacher would go up to this area to get a bunch of clay to bring it back for us to make little ashtrays. That shows how old I am.
Mom, you have a ash?
Oh my God.
Yeah, well, you have where would the highway relocate to?
It's going to go over to this side, and actually, we will be showing that, but basically, so there's a ridge along the east side of the reservoir, and this was owned by Folsom Cement. And so, they would quarry limestone to be able to create cement. And so it's not this County Road 23, there's a haul road basically that goes up on the east side of that ridge. that is going to be the new highway location. And so, as you go north on the reservoir, there is actually at the very top here, there's a little swale, a little dip, and that's where the rock cut is going to be, where the road is going to go through that rock cut and reconnect with 287. It's going to shorten the drive from Fort Collins to Livermore by 2.5 miles. Wow. 2.5 miles. Oh, great. There are so many semis that use that road to go from Fort Collins to Laramie that CDOT has built into its emissions plan the reduction of emissions of those trucks going up 2.5 miles, multiplied across all the truck trips annually that use that highway.
Yeah, one other question. Did Northern Water buy the land to relocate the highway, or is that more of a CDOT deal? Or
No, so we had to buy the land, and we're actually paying to have the highway built. And then, but it's going to be built to CDOT standards. I don't know how you turn the keys to a highway over to an agency, but we're going to turn the keys over to them when we're done and say, okay, this is now yours, CDOT. We have built it to your specs. They will inspect it to make sure that what we say is accurate. We're using a contractor who does a lot of CDOT highways. And so we will be basically deeding that over to them. So, but the property is, I think we haven't closed on it, but we're close to with Wholesome, that we're in agreement on it. It's just a matter of cutting the check. Yeah, with a lot of zeros. Yeah, go ahead.
The water that you're using to fill the reservoir, where is that water going now? And will those people miss it when it's being converted to fill the reservoir?
Well, we would not be able to use it at all if anyone was affected downstream. I mean, lunch is at 12:40 or 11:30, right? Okay, well, because I think that this is super important, and I mean, I normally don't go into this detail, but this group needs to know this story. That there are water providers who, during the first part of the 20th century, had water rights and actually had plans for reservoirs all up and down the Food Canyon. That, I mean, Greeley, Fort Collins, and the Bureau of Reclamation had plans to build dams at places like, Rustic. There's a plan, right downstream from Rustic to put a big reservoir there. And same thing with down the canyon, down below Cooter Park. There's a big reservoir on the books with reclamation. When when Two Forks got denied by EPA to serve Denver, I think everybody realized there's not going to be a reservoir. People were starting to see the writing on the wall about on-channel reservoirs in the canyon. But even before then, the Wild and Scenic Act got passed by Congress and signed by Reagan. And there was a group of people who wanted to have the Pooter designated as wild and scenic. But because there were so many water projects on the books, it looked like it was going to be impossible, because wild and scenic would really prevent that from happening. So what happened is Hank Brown, senator, he was first a representative from Greeley and then was our senator in the 90s, negotiated a compromise, basically saying, okay, friends of the Pooter, would you be willing to allow for construction of a reservoir outside of the canyon off channel in exchange for having this be designated as wild and scenic? And in 1986, that happened. And it was, I was too young to really fully recognize the importance of it. But to this day, the Pooter River is the only wild and scenic river in the state of Colorado. And why is that? It's because all those water providers gave up. And when I say they basically abandoned plans to build reservoirs in the canyon, knowing that in the future they would be able to come down and build a reservoir outside the canyon off the main channel. Now, I don't mean to denigrate those who have come later, who say, well, you made that deal with those other people, you didn't make it with us. But that's kind of the history of where this project came from, because it was at that point in the eighties that this ranch along US 287 came up for sale. And so Northern Water bought it in the eighties, thinking about what it would be used for in the future. And it's interesting when you hear opponents talk about, this pristine valley, why are we doing this? Well, that valley's been kept pristine because it's been owned by Northern Water. That it was, you look at a whole bunch of ranches around there who sold around the same time. Bonner Peaks was another ranch, and it is now full of houses. And this, I think, would have been full of houses too, had it not been sold to Northern Water. And so it's one of those things where sometimes being old and being from Greeley is not the best thing, but sometimes it gives me some context to be able to say, okay, here's how some of these things fit together 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago to enable us to be where we are today. Now, to your question of what is the water right? So the water right actually was part of what's called the Gray Mountain right. So Gray Mountain is one of the features of the canyon. And so Northern Water has had that water right and has been, you have to show the water court that you are still building towards being able to use that water. It is a very junior right though. And so that right only comes into priority really during the heaviest part of runoff. And so basically, if you think about runoff being kind of a bell curve of, starting in early April, going to June and back down, our water right only comes into play during those periods. That also is a time when some important ecological things happen in the river. And so as part of our permits, and we'll talk about this in just a moment, as part of our permits, we did have to make sure that we are not using the peak of the runoff. So we have a 72-hour window where we shut off the gates to make sure that peak is doing its job. And then also we'll talk about some of the requirements, minimum stream flow requirements that we're going to be required to put water back into the river throughout the course of its year.
What's the year on the water right?
So the Gray Mountain right is, I believe, also from the 70s. And and then the other water right on the Platte is from the 80s. So the one thing, and I mean, we talk about it a lot, but I hope that this session or this class is really showing you the importance of how the cooler has been part of our lives for as long as European settlement has occurred here. And so we have been measuring the Poudre River and its output for 170 years. And so I guess that's the good news, is that we have really good data to show and be able to predict when those high flows are going to occur. And so that we can identify that as part of our.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have all the exchanges lined up?
We do not. It's akin to, I would like during the CBT, it was proposed in the 30s, and during the 40s, they were selling those units, but it wasn't wet water yet. So it took a long time to get that component put together. I think it's akin to that here, that people want to see construction before they enter into an agreement. And there's also some fear of missing out on oil and gas. And what I'm thinking is, this is just Jeff's thinking, not organizational thinking, that I think we're coming perhaps on another downside, perhaps, of oil and gas water leasing. But right now, short-term agreements are being made between producers and oil and gas, as opposed to longer-term exchange agreements with us. That we think that once we start moving bulldozers or moving dirt, that'll come out. That being said, water time is a long time. And so, we probably won't have all the exchanges in place when the reservoir is finished. What those exchanges do is that allows us to hit that full target yield identified in the EIS. So it might be the 2030s before we get to actually finishing Galeton and being able to make those exchanges. That this is a step in a long, complicated process. A couple of other things I wanted to talk about here. Where does the water actually come from? If you're driving up the Hoover Canyon, just right inside the mouth, there's a pretty hefty diversion with a little house there. That diversion is kind of suffered through time, that it doesn't look that great. And that diversion dam certainly doesn't look that great, and it's really kind of a dangerous one for boaters. That's where the Poudre Valley Canal starts. And so as part of this project, we're going to go in and we're going to have to rehabilitate that diversion, make it safer, number one. But then number two, give it that ability to divert the amount of water when it's available. Because again, it's not going to be available, but only a couple of months, 3 months out of the year. So there's also a piece of CBT infrastructure we have to think about. So if you drive up the canyon beyond the picnic rock, go around the corner, there's another pretty hefty diversion there in San Francisco. That's called the Monroe Canal, and that's part of a diversion that feeds North Poudre Irrigation Company with water and through exchange some water through CBT. And that canal actually is open along the side of the cliff and goes through the reservoir footprint. And so as part of the construction, we're going to have to convert that canal into a pipeline and have it buried underneath the reservoir. So we'll have to encase it in lots of concrete and things like that. And the reason is because the flow schedule out of the Monroe Canal is different from the flow schedule and the flow regimen out of the reservoir. So the canal users, they can't be harmed. So we're going to ensure that they're still getting deliveries through that canal. It's just going to go on a mystical journey underneath the reservoir. So as Poudre Valley Canal brings the water over towards the reservoir site, the reservoir site is actually, the dam will have to get water past it. So there'll actually be a pump station here to pump the water into the reservoir. So that's another component of this project is, it's not a very big lift, but it is a lift to get the water basically onto the reservoir side on the other side of the dam. And that will include a 1,500 acre foot forebay. And seems like, well, that's like 100 the size of this. Well, 1,500 acre foot reservoir is, comparable to, just a little bit under the size of like Lake Estes. It's a pretty sizable little forebay. So where are we right now with the project? We're advancing towards final design. That we're at 90%, and we think that by middle of next year we will be in the absolute that 99% that we're ready to give those plans to a contractor. I do have to go to another slide. Well, let's talk a little bit about relocation. This is a critical path for the reservoir. Again, it's nearing final design as well. SEMA is the construction manager and general contractor. By combining those two things, you get the builders involved with the design to show where they can find efficiencies to get things done. And we have most of the land purchases here. I think there's one actually on this side, on the east side of the divide, that a portion of a ranch goes up to where the highway is. Again, we don't view that as a big obstacle, but just having something to check on that yet. To get a permit for this was, I mean, as you all know, permitting is difficult, and especially for a project that, I mean, there's a lot of people looking at this and wanting to make sure that the Poudre River, maintains, its biological processes in Fort Collins. And so, and I'm actually gonna go to the next slide. Oh my gosh, we're so far. Okay. Because I want to go to this slide because we're running out of time and I really want to get to here because this is really the crux of our discussion today. That the group of emerging communities formed in 2003 and we started the NEPA process in 2004. In 2008, the draft environmental impact statement was released and it was not good. That the way the project was designed had some flaws in terms of what it might mean for water quality. And so it really meant that we had to go back to the drawing board. And one of the areas of the drawing board that we had to go back to was actually talking with Fort Collins, talking to Greeley, because all of us were looking at projects that would involve Poudre River water, and we were all not quite using the same data. And so we had to go back and form what's called a common technical platform, just so that all of the apples and oranges were appley and orangey together. And that meant, and these dashed lines are not to scale, because there was 7 years of that with the until we released the supplemental EIS. And it was better, but it wasn't perfect. Nothing's ever perfect, but it wasn't where we needed it to be. And so we came back to the drawing board and said, okay, what is something that we can do that will help us get from here with some concerns about water quality to final approval? And the key is in 2016, we added what's called the conveyance refinement, or the refined conveyance portion of this. So I'm going to go way back again, because basically the concern was this stretch of river during times that, well, actually, not just during times when we're using water, but there are other times of the year when it gets pretty darn shallow in that river. And in fact, I haven't looked today, but there was a stretch in September and October where the Poudre River through downtown was less than 10 CFS. And you can't, I mean, that's a very, very small amount of water. And so what our engineers went back and looked at is saying, can we use the river to convey a portion of the yield of the project? And then for reasons about just size of infrastructure, I mean, they looked at big numbers and little numbers and realized that there's a midpoint number where during the winter time, you could send 18 CFS down the river. So more than doubling what's in the river now. And during the summertime, adding another 25 CFS and using the river as the conveyance tool for the yield of the project. And they identified areas kind of downstream from downtown, but upstream of where Box Elder Creek comes into the river as a place where you would then take that yield back out. Well, what's with Box Elder Creek? Well, some of the plains creeks here on the Northern Front Range, yeah, they're natural, and they're carrying a whole bunch of natural arsenic and natural selenium and natural other heavy metals. Wholly natural. It's part of what is the underlying bedrock of the Front Range are these heavy metals, but that drastically increases the difficulty of treatment. And so by bringing water from, basically out of the pristine Poudre, goes into Glade, and then gets carried down through the channel through Fort Collins. And if you can pick it up before it hits Box Elder Creek, and then the other element, which is the Fort Collins wastewater treatment plant, pick it up before there, then you can blend for the customers that are using their water. And, and what's the concern about wastewater treatment plants? I mean, yeah, everyone downstream of Estes Park is probably drinking some of their water that's out of the wastewater treatment plant. But one of the challenges is things that they can't right now treat out, things like pharmaceuticals. And so by being able to pick up that water before you hit the effluent of the treatment plant, you're also able to avoid the challenge of trying to treat water that has some man-made substances that are perhaps a little bit more synthetic than what might normally be there. So about a third of the yield is going to come down through this conveyance. It eliminates dry up points. So one of the things that, I'm sure you learned this in Colorado water law, is you can, if you've got a water right in certain conditions, you can take all the water out of the river. And under this, we had to go get a law passed that basically says that if you've got a permit requirement to deliver water downstream through a river channel, that water is not available to be diverted by a downstream user. And so this 1/3 yield, you won't have one of these ditch companies saying, oh, water, that they have to let it go by because it's part of a state and federal mandated plan. And when we say it improves the environment, I mean, as my engineering friends would say, they don't know a lot about fish, but they know we need water. And if you look at the 10 CFS Poudre River right now, it's hard to be a fish these days in that stretch of river. I'm going to wrap it up there so that, I have to say that this was a super quick, really just barely touched the surface of this. But some things I want you to come away from this talk knowing is, first of all, we started the environmental impact statement process in 2004, but many of the agreements and the discussions about this project go decades behind that. And, in fact, the wild and scenic designation for the Poudre River actually, is a data point in this project's progression. So that's number one. Number two, by going through that NEPA process, it is, as our previous speaker talked about, it is it's an alternatives analysis process. For Greeley, their process for Milton Seaman Reservoir showed that a better alternative was Terry Bison Ranch. For us, the alternatives analysis, first of all, there was a component early on that was going to include Horsetooth Reservoir. Now that got screened out, and the alternatives led us toward making sure that some of the yield of the project is going through the city of Fort Collins. And then the third thing that I would just point out is that these communities that are growing, that they include, Fort Collins, Windsor, Severance, Frederick, Firestone. These communities are, as you've heard today, these are where people are, when they move in from out of state, they are moving to Weld and Larimer counties, often to these communities being served by MIS. And they're not calling and asking, hey, what's your water portfolio like? They're asking, they're doing an inspection of the house and turning on the faucet. And that's as far as they're going. And so at Northern Water, as we are involved in these projects, we're really looking toward how can we be meeting the demands for the future while still adhering to all of the nations and states and local environmental rules, because you need that social license to be able to do projects like this. And how can we do it without affecting downstream water users, both in the state of Colorado and in Nebraska and in the lower Colorado River? And so these things they're important and they're complicated. And we got a permit for this and it is now under litigation. And so if you want to see how much I'll chat over lunch, I'll just try to keep my mouth full. And, but what, honestly, what does that mean? Well, that means that, we can't just go out and build with the permit right now, which is fine because we still have some final design things to do, some final, selling of the bonds to be able to pay for this project. But, the people who are suing against the project commented and presented their issues throughout the federal permitting process. And what we would like to point out that our project is better because of some of the opponents' concerns that they brought up. And we'd like to get this moving forward. So with that, is that a downer?
Yes.
But then this afternoon, we're gonna show you what happens because Jimmy Hall was under a lawsuit also. And we were able to come together and actually reach a settlement agreement with the same people who are suing us on it. And so, there are caveats. So I'll take questions, but also lunch is waiting for us out in the hall.
Questions?
We get you as the tour guide up there too, yeah, so we're stuck with you, right?
I know, right? Yes.
So would you have, on the, diversion structure you guys said you were gonna rebuild, would that have access for boats to go through that structure safely?
So structures like that, I mean, right now it is just an absolute death trap.
Yeah. No boats go through that.
Right. I'm not sure that it is, and there's a lot of private and also city of Greeley water intake is right up in there too. That I'm not sure if that will ever become a public boating way, but we were planning to build what we call a safer. Like it won't be deadly, but it's not gonna be something that is gonna be like a water park, hey, let's take our raft over this cool section. I don't foresee that becoming a public waterway, but it's gonna be rehabilitated so that it's not a death.
So it's not on the main stem?
Oh, it is on the inside, yeah.
Are we talking about the overhead dam that's like about a mile up? From
Yeah.
the place?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, my former job was, I was the editor of the local newspaper before I got this job, and so, every summer there'd be someone who didn't take out, and, people don't realize the danger of those low-head dams. That being said, and I foreshadowed it, but I didn't get back to it. We've actually built two parts of the project as part of our mitigation. One of them is at Watson Lake. If you go up to the northeast corner of the lake, there's a new fish passage that goes around the Lowhead Dam that allows native fish. By the way, they're not like salmon, they can't jump. They need a ramp to get up the river. So that's already built, and that was paid for with combination of NUSA and the dairy, in addition to Northern Water paying for that. And we just opened 2 weeks ago Eastland Park Edition in Windsor. That is a wetland restoration project and public park that is going to be really cool next spring. It's really cool right now. You should go see it. And that's actually part of NISP. NISP is under construction. It's just the mitigation pieces, not the main dam quite yet.
Is there opposition to it still? Is that still remaining like from Fort Collins? What's the opposition to it?
So there is opposition, although I have to say that interestingly enough, and if Melanie, hi Melanie.
Yeah.
So Melanie, I think, is being a recording of this call. So love that one. NISP participants, there's still a land use permit that we may have to engage with Fort Collins. They've been historically opposed to the project, but just in the past 6 months, they passed a resolution vacating all those previous opposition statements. So that when or if we come forward with an application for a land use permit, that it will be clear that they're viewing it just on its basis rather than on their previous opposition. So there's no official opposition from City of Fort Collins, from Larimer County. There is opposition certainly by the group Save the Cooter, American Whitewater, a few other nonprofits, but no official other governmental opposition. Okay, the laws of thermodynamics are cooling the chicken and warming the property.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
And we closed the door so that the smell wouldn't walk in here. That'd be good.
Didn't we get in?
Yeah.
Touch that.
I'm not allowed to touch my.
It's 77, right? I felt air conditioning. It's cold. Did you feel?
No, but.
So I've left the meeting. I don't know if we have anything else planned.
Oh, yeah.
Here.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think we do. I think you're fine.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, though.